For many, many years, two women were some of the best actors in all of Britain. Their names were Judi Dench and Maggie Smith. People knew they were friends. Everyone talked about how close they were. Some people even made up stories about their friendship. But here's the thing, neither of them ever talked publicly about how deep their friendship really was. Now, at 89 years old, Judi Dench has finally opened up. She's very sad because her friend passed away. She told the truth about what their friendship meant to her, and how losing Maggie has left a huge hole in her heart that she can barely put into words. Maggie Smith's life didn't start in fancy theaters or in Hollywood. She was born with the full name Margaret Natalie Smith on December 28, 1934, in a town called Ilford in Essex, England. She was the youngest kid in her family. She had two older siblings. Her family was middle class, which means they weren't super rich, but they weren't poor either. Her dad, whose name was Nathaniel, worked as a pathologist, which is a type of doctor. Her mom's name was Margaret Hutton, and she was born in Scotland and worked as a secretary. In 1939, something really scary was happening. World War II was starting in Europe. The Smith family was worried about German planes bombing London, so they moved away from Ilford to a city called Oxford to be safer. Little did they know, this move would totally change Maggie's life. Oxford was an amazing place full of theaters, books, and education. It was the perfect place for a little girl who loved words and performing to grow up. When Maggie went to Oxford High School, she wasn't the loudest or most outgoing kid in class. But there was something special about her that people noticed. Her teachers could see she had a big imagination and a natural talent for acting. She loved reading Shakespeare, the famous old writer. Maggie wasn't the type of kid who needed to be super loud to get attention. Instead, she liked to watch people, study how they acted, and learn everything she could. By the time she was 16 years old, Maggie was ready to start her career. She left regular school and joined something called the Oxford Playhouse, which was a theater where she learned all about acting and putting on plays. When she was only 17, she was already performing on stage in a Shakespeare play called Twelfth Night, where she played a character named Viola. For Maggie, this wasn't just pretending or having fun. This was the real beginning of what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. Maggie had big dreams, so she applied to a really fancy acting school in London called the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, which everyone just calls RADA. It was super hard to get into this school. Lots of people wanted to go there, but only a few got accepted. When Maggie did her audition, the teachers could tell she was special. She was rough around the edges, but she had raw talent that showed she would become something amazing. At RADA, she learned everything about acting, how to use her voice properly, how to move on stage, and how to perform in classical plays, especially Shakespeare's works. All of these skills became the building blocks of her whole career. By the early 1950s, she had joined the Oxford Playhouse Repertory Company. This was a group that put on lots and lots of different plays, one after another. Maggie had to learn new roles really quickly, which helped her get better at remembering her lines and understanding all kinds of different emotions and characters. She did funny plays and sad plays, and she proved she could be just as good as actors who had been doing it for way longer than her. She was still in her early 20s, but her future was already clear. She wasn't just going to be an actress for a little while, she was going to be one for a very long time. By the late 1950s, Maggie Smith had gotten too good for the small theaters in Oxford. In 1959, she joined a really famous theater company in London called the Old Vic. This was a legendary place where actors' careers could either become amazing or fall apart, especially when they performed Shakespeare's difficult plays. At the Old Vic, Maggie got to play some of the most important female characters in Shakespeare's works. She played Desdemona in a play called Othello, Viola in Twelfth Night again, and even Cleopatra in Antony and Cleopatra. Each role was hard in different ways. She had to change how she spoke and acted, showing different feelings like being vulnerable, strong, gentle, or commanding. People who watched her Both the critics who wrote about plays and regular audience members started to realize she was truly extraordinary. Maggie had this special ability to be calm and controlled, but also really intense at the same time. When she showed emotions, they felt real and natural, never fake or overdone. Working at the Old Vic also put her in the same place as Laurence Olivier, who was the most famous British actor at that time. He was starting up a brand new theater company called the National Theatre Company. Olivier really admired how talented Maggie was, so he invited her to join his company in the early 1960s. But just because he admired her didn't mean they always got along. Underneath all the acting and performances, there was tension between them. Maggie was smart, funny, and she wasn't afraid to speak up for herself. These were great qualities, but sometimes they clashed with Olivier's huge personality and ego. Their working relationship got really tense during a performance in 1964 of the play Othello. Maggie was playing Desdemona, and Olivier was playing Othello. Maggie delivered her lines in such a beautiful and interesting way that the audience paid a lot of attention to her performance. Olivier, whose ego was as big as his talent, got really frustrated. In one heated moment while they were on stage, he actually slapped her. This wasn't part of the play or the script. It was a real outburst because he was angry. Many years later, Maggie talked about what happened on a TV show called The Graham Norton Show, and she made jokes about it in her usual dry, funny way. But behind the laughter was the real story of a young actress who had to fight for her place in a world where big, powerful men were in charge. Even though she and Olivier had this clash, she kept working with him in other plays like The Master Builder and Much Ado About Nothing. Their relationship was difficult and sometimes explosive, but it also pushed both of them to be better artists. Olivier would push boundaries and try new things, and Maggie refused to let him overshadow her or steal the spotlight. The tension between them was painful sometimes, but it also made Maggie tougher and better at her craft. When she finally left the National Theatre, she wasn't just a promising young actress anymore. She had become a powerful performer with her own unique style and voice that no one could ignore. While Maggie Smith was conquering the stages in London, the world of movies was starting to notice her. Her first important movie role came in 1958 in a British crime thriller called Nowhere to Go. She was still young and not very famous yet, but her performance as a character named Bridget Howard was so good that she got nominated for a BAFTA award, which is a big honor in British film. It was the first sign that her talent wasn't just for the theater stage. It could also work on camera in movies. The big turning point came in 1963 with a movie called The VIP. This was a fancy drama that starred really huge movie stars like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Maggie only had a supporting role, which means she wasn't the main character. Her part might have seemed small next to such big celebrities, but she stood out anyway. She commanded attention with her perfect timing and the emotions she showed. Movie producers in Hollywood started to pay attention to her. Then came the role that would completely transform her life and make her a legend. She played Jean Brodie in a movie called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. In this film, she played a weird, fiercely independent Scottish school teacher. Maggie's performance was full of intelligence, charm, and an unsettling intensity that made you uncomfortable sometimes. Jean Brodie believed she was helping her students become great people, but her arrogance and strange ideas also led them into tragedy and bad situations. Maggie captured every contradiction of this character. She moved easily between moments that were funny and witty, moments that showed idealism and hope, and moments that were chilling and manipulative. Critics, the people who review movies, said she was a revelation, meaning she was absolutely amazing. In 1970, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, which is also called an Oscar. This is one of the biggest awards you can win in movies. Winning this award took her from being a respected British stage actress to being an international film star that everyone around the world knew. Unlike a lot of actors who would have rushed to Hollywood to become glamorous movie stars, Maggie remained cautious. She kept going back to do theater, continuing to go back and forth between stage plays and movies. But the movies kept pulling her back. In 1978, she appeared in a bittersweet comedy by Neil Simon called California Sweet. She played Diana Barry, an actress who was dealing with professional disappointment and struggling in her marriage. Maggie filled this role with a mixture of sharp humor and deep sadness. For this performance, she won her second Academy Award, this time for Best Supporting Actress. Behind all the awards and the applause from audiences, Maggie Smith's private life had struggles that were as dramatic as any role she ever played in movies or on stage. In the 1960s, she married an actor named Robert Stevens, though the document says Stevens. It's actually Stevens. He was a charismatic, charming performer who had lots of talent, but also lots of problems. Their marriage started out with promise and hope. They were two brilliant actors who could share the stage and screen together. But behind closed doors, when no one was watching, Stevens struggled with alcoholism, which means he drank too much alcohol and couldn't control it. He also had erratic moods, meaning his feelings would change suddenly and unpredictably. His career started to fall apart, and their relationship began to crumble under the weight of his drinking, his cheating on her with other women, and all the emotional strain. At one point during the filming of a movie called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, Stevens even tried to commit suicide. This was a desperate, heartbreaking sign of how far he had fallen and how much he was struggling. For Maggie, the final straw, the thing that made her decide she couldn't take it anymore, came when she found out that Stevens had been having an affair with his own receptionist, a secret that wasn't even told to her by him, but by his dentist friend. Finding out about this betrayal from someone else made it even more painful. After 6 years of trying really hard to hold together a marriage that was full of pain and problems, she filed for divorce in 1973. The separation left her to raise their 2 sons, Chris Larkin and Toby Stevens, mostly on her own. Toby, who would later become famous himself in movies like Die Another Day and a show called Black Sails, has talked about how difficult it was growing up in a household that was overshadowed by all this turmoil and chaos. But he has also said that his mother was a steady, grounding force, meaning she kept things stable and gave them strength even when everything else was falling apart. After the divorce, something wonderful happened. Fate led Maggie back to a man who had loved her from far away for a long time, a playwright named Beverly Cross. They had first met way back in the 1950s, and Cross had even proposed marriage to her once. But the timing wasn't right, and circumstances kept them apart. By the mid-1970s, both of them were free from other relationships, and this time their bond held strong. They got married in 1975, beginning a partnership that lasted until he died in 1998. Cross became a stabilizing presence in her life. He was a source of encouragement and love, who helped shield her from all the chaos and craziness of the entertainment industry. When he passed away, it devastated her. She was completely heartbroken. Maggie admitted later that she never got married again because no one could ever replace him. He was the love of her life. Along with all these personal upheavals and relationship struggles, Maggie also faced serious health battles. In the 1980s, she was diagnosed with Graves' disease. This is an autoimmune condition, which means her body's defense system was attacking itself. It affected her thyroid gland and caused noticeable changes to her eyes that people could see. She had to undergo radiotherapy and surgery to treat it, but she kept acting anyway. She refused to let this illness define who she was or stop her from doing what she loved. Then in 2007, during the filming of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. This is a very serious disease. She had to undergo chemotherapy, which is a tough medical treatment that makes you feel really sick. All while she was going through this treatment, she continued to work on the Harry Potter movie set, playing Professor McGonagall. Later, she admitted that the treatments had left her knocked sideways, which means they made her feel terrible and weak, but quitting was never an option for her. She never even considered stopping. Acting was both her anchor, the thing that kept her steady, and her weapon against despair and sadness. By the time the year 2000 rolled around, Maggie Smith had already earned a reputation as one of Britain's greatest living actresses. Yet, amazingly, her most globally recognized roles, the ones that would make her famous all around the entire world, were still to come. In 2001, she put on the robes and became Professor Minerva McGonagall in Harry Potter, and the Philosopher's Stone, called the Sorcerer's Stone in America. For many younger viewers and children, she wasn't the Oscar-winning star from the prime of Miss Jean Brodie or California Suite. Instead, she was the stern, sharp-witted deputy headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. From the very first film, Maggie brought Professor McGonagall to life with authority and warmth in equal measure. She could silence an entire room with just a single look or glance. Yet her compassion and care for her students always shone through clearly. Throughout all 8 Harry Potter films that were released between 2001 and 2011, she became a symbol of loyalty, courage, and quiet strength. Even while she was secretly going through chemotherapy for breast cancer during the filming of The Half-Blood Prince in 2007, she delivered her lines with the same precision and dignity that had defined her entire career. For millions and millions of children all around the world, she was the embodiment of wisdom itself. She represented what it meant to be wise and caring. Not long after the final Harry Potter film came out, Maggie found herself at the center of another cultural phenomenon, something that became hugely popular. It was called Downton Abbey. The show debuted or started in 2010. This period drama transported audiences back in time into the lives of the aristocratic Crawley family, who were rich nobles. Maggie played Violet Crawley, the Dowager Countess of Grantham, which was a fancy title for a powerful older woman in the family. Once again, Maggie stole every single scene she was in. With her razor-sharp delivery of lines, her cutting wit, and her hidden tenderness underneath, she became the voice of the entire series. Whether she was questioning the purpose of a weekend or completely destroying her rivals with just a single sentence, Violet's one-liners became iconic, meaning people remembered them and repeated them all the time. The show was an absolutely massive sensation. It was watched in more than 100 countries around the world. Maggie's performance earned her 3 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe Award, and 4 Screen Actors Guild Awards. For someone who was already celebrated and famous in Britain, this was a second wave of fame that extended her reach across different generations and continents. Young fans who had first discovered her in Harry Potter now watched her again in Downton Abbey. This cemented her place as a cultural icon for the 21st century, meaning she became someone that represented an entire era. In the middle of all of Maggie Smith's towering, amazing career, one thing stayed constant: her friendship with Judi Dench. They first crossed paths or met each other in the 1950s at the Old Vic Theatre. They were 2 young actresses who were hungry for opportunity, sharing dressing rooms and even competing against each other for the same roles. From the very start, they were complete opposites in temperament, which means they had very different personalities. Maggie had sharp wit and dry humor. She was sarcastic and clever. Judi had warmth and lightness. She was friendly and cheerful. But those differences only drew them closer together. Sometimes opposites attract, and that's exactly what happened with them. Over the decades, which means over many, many years, like 60 or 70 years, Their paths intertwined again and again. In films, they played side by side in movies like A Room with a View, Tea with Mussolini, Ladies in Lavender, and The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. On stage, they captivated audiences in a play by David Hare called The Breath of Life, which ran in London from 2002 to 2003. Their natural chemistry, built on trust and decades of shared experiences, shone brightest in a 2018 documentary called Nothing Like a Dame. In this film, audiences got to witness their laughter, their teasing of each other, and their deep affection, along with two other fellow great actresses, Eileen Atkins and Joan Plowright. To the public, to regular people watching from the outside, there was often speculation of rivalry. After all, both women were regularly nominated for the same awards, and they were both considered titans or giants of British acting. People thought they might be jealous of each other or competitive. Yet both of them rejected this idea completely. Judy once said, "Maggie is one of my closest friends. I couldn't do half of what she does." Maggie, with her characteristic dry humor, added that anyone who thought they were rivals had clearly never seen them laughing over tea together. That laughter, all those decades of joy and friendship, came to a heartbreaking end in September 2024. Maggie Smith died peacefully in a hospital at the age of 89, surrounded by her family and friends. Her sons, the actors Toby Stephens and Chris Larkin, released a statement to the public. It said, "She leaves 2 sons and 5 loving grandchildren who are devastated by the loss of their extraordinary mother and grandmother." For Judi Dench, this loss was deeply, deeply personal. Just a few days later, at something called the Cheltenham Literature Festival on October 5, 2024, she was asked on stage about grief. Grief is the deep sadness you feel when someone you love dies. Dench had once described grief as being like petrol, or gasoline, an energy that fuels you and keeps you going. But when she tried to answer the question on stage, her voice broke and she started crying. "I suppose because the energy that's created by grief," she began, but then she trailed off in tears. She couldn't finish her sentence. The entire audience fell silent, witnessing the rawness and realness of her mourning. Everyone could see how much pain she was in. Later, Judy revealed her most intimate, personal tribute to Maggie. At her home in a place called Surrey in England, she maintains a private forest. In this forest, she plants trees in memory of departed friends, people she loved who have died. She has trees for Alan Rickman, Helen McCrory, Natasha Richardson, Stephen Sondheim, all people she loved who passed away. All of them are remembered there with their own trees. For Maggie, she planted a crabapple tree. A crabapple is a type of small apple tree. On the day of Maggie's funeral, Judy's gardener brought her a single crabapple from the tree, just one small fruit. Judy carried it in her pocket throughout the entire funeral service. "It was a very nice thing to have," she said quietly afterward. That small fruit, held close to her heart in her pocket, was her way of keeping Maggie with her one last time. Their friendship had spanned more than 6 decades, more than 60 years. It survived the storms of fame, illness, and personal tragedy. All the difficulties and challenges they both went through, their friendship stayed strong. And in Judy's grief, the world saw not just the death of a legendary actress, but the breaking of a bond that had defined an era of British theatre and film. Their friendship represented an entire period of time in acting history. Their story is one of brilliance, loyalty, and heartbreaking loss. Maggie Smith gave the world unforgettable performances that no one will ever forget. But perhaps her greatest role, the most important part she ever played, was the friend she became to Judi Dench. Now, Judy carries that memory with her quietly and tenderly in the forest she has grown for those she has loved and lost. What's your favorite Maggie Smith performance, and how do you remember her best? Was it seeing her as the wise Professor McGonagall in Harry Potter, or as the witty Dowager Countess in Downton Abbey, or maybe in one of her earlier classic films? Share your thoughts and memories in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this about the lives of legendary actors and the friendships that shaped them.